I've worked as a ranger on the Appalachian Trail for nearly 3 years now. At 34, I've grown accustomed to the quiet rhythms of this job, helping lost hikers find their way back to the main trail, dealing with the occasional bear sighting or rattlesnake encounter, and occasionally stumbling upon campers who think they're clever enough to ignore the posted regulations. It's a role that demands patience, vigilance, and a certain comfort with solitude, especially on long, solo night patrols. I've always prided myself on being level-headed, not one to let the wilderness spook me. But there's something about being out on the trail after sunset, something intangible yet undeniable, that seems to alter the very character of the forest. My colleagues have shared similar sentiments, describing how the woods seem to breathe differently at night, as if they're alive in a way that daylight conceals. I never paid much attention to their musings until one unforgettable night last September, when I finally understood what they meant. There's a particular section of my patrol route near the base of a ravine where we enforce strict no camping and no fire policies. The area is remote, dense with vegetation, and prone to accidents. Over the years, there have been enough falls and near misses to warrant these rules. It's not unusual for me to stumble upon an adventurous hiker or rebellious camper ignoring the signs, so when I spotted a faint flicker of light through the trees that night, I immediately assumed it was someone who had decided to break the rules. The glow was faint, just barely visible through the thick foliage, and I figured it was probably a small campfire or a lantern. It was nearing midnight, and I'd been walking for hours under a moonless sky, my flashlight casting long, shifting shadows ahead of me. The forest was unusually quiet, no rustling leaves, no chirping crickets, not even the occasional hoot of an owl. That silence should have struck me as odd, but at the time, I was too focused on the flickering light to think much of it. I turned off the main trail, keeping my flashlight pointed low to avoid startling whoever was out there. As I moved closer, however, I started to feel an unexplainable unease creeping over me. The glow wasn't like any campfire I'd ever seen. It didn't have the steady, warm pulse of flames, nor did it resemble the sharp beam of a flashlight. Instead, it flickered and swayed with an almost ethereal quality, like the flame of an old-fashioned oil lantern. Who even uses lanterns like that anymore? The thought crossed my mind, but curiosity pushed me forward. The light seemed to move deeper into the woods as I approached, almost as if it were leading me somewhere. Every time I thought I was getting closer, it would vanish for a few moments, only to reappear farther ahead. My rational mind told me to turn back, that this was strange and unsafe. But another part of me, the part that thrives on solving mysteries and finding answers, refused to let go. I convinced myself I was just doing my job, checking for rogue campers and ensuring no one was putting themselves in danger. As I ventured farther off the main trail, the air around me seemed to change. It grew thicker, heavier, as though the forest itself were pressing down on me. My breathing sounded unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence, and every step felt like it echoed too sharply against the stillness. The undergrowth became denser, forcing me to duck beneath low-hanging branches and step carefully over roots that jutted out of the ground like skeletal fingers. The flickering light remained just out of reach, teasing me with its distant glow. Then, suddenly, the light stopped moving. It hung there, suspended in the darkness, as if waiting for me to approach. I hesitated, my instincts finally catching up to my curiosity. Something about the way it hovered there felt deliberate, almost like an invitation or a trap. But I couldn't turn back, not after coming this far. I took a deep breath, steadied my nerves, and stepped closer. Just as I was within a few yards of the light, it blinked out, plunging the forest into complete darkness. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly switched my flashlight to full beam, sweeping it through the trees in search of whoever, or whatever, had been carrying that lantern. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing nothing but the gnarled trunks of ancient trees and the dense tangle of underbrush. "All right," I called out, my voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. "If this is some kind of joke, you've had your fun." Silence. No response. The weight of the forest seemed to press in even closer, wrapping around me like a living thing. I took another step forward, scanning the area with my flashlight. That's when I saw it, a rusted old lantern hanging from a low branch, swaying gently as if caught in a breeze. Except there was no breeze. The air was dead still. I stared at the lantern, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. The glass panels were grimy with age, and the handle was so corroded it looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. There were no footprints in the dirt around the tree, no signs that anyone had been here recently. I approached the lantern cautiously, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave it alone. But I couldn't just walk away, not without making sure it wasn't a hazard. A stray flame in these woods could spell disaster, and I wasn't about to let that happen on my watch. Reaching out, I grasped the handle. It was cold and rough under my fingers, heavier than I expected. With a quick twist of the knob, I extinguished the flame, plunging everything into an even deeper darkness. As I set the lantern back on the branch, I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to leave. The silence around me was suffocating, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the pounding of my heart. I started backing away, my flashlight beam flickering slightly as I moved. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the light flicker back to life or, worse, someone or something watching me from the shadows. By the time I made it back to the main trail, dawn was just beginning to break. The pale light of morning felt like a blessing, chasing away the oppressive darkness of the forest. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd seen, not right away. How could I? No one would believe me. And honestly, I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. The next day, I returned to that section of the trail, determined to find some logical explanation. I combed through the area, searching for footprints, a campsite, or any sign that someone had been there. But there was nothing. The forest looked untouched, as though no one had set foot there in years. I still patrolled that same stretch of trail, though I've never seen the lantern or its strange carrier again. But every so often, when I'm out there alone at night, I catch a flicker of light through the trees, just at the edge of my vision. And when I do, I keep my distance. Some mysteries, I've learned, are better left unsolved. The fog hung thick that morning, almost tangible in its weight, curling between the trees and clinging to the ground like a ghostly veil. I'd ventured out early, just before dawn, craving a hike to clear my mind after a demanding week at work. The trailhead parking lot was empty when I arrived, and the headlights of my car barely pierced the dense haze. It wasn't my first experience with this kind of weather. Growing up near the Appalachian Trail, I'd grown familiar with the murky mornings that turned the forest into an otherworldly maze. Normally, I found the solitude comforting, even meditative. But as I laced up my boots and adjusted my pack, a strange unease crept in, uninvited and inexplicable. I brushed it off as leftover tension from the week, convincing myself that a good hike was exactly what I needed. The first half-mile of the trail was uneventful, though unnervingly quiet. Usually, the woods were alive with the sounds of early morning, birds calling to one another, squirrels rustling in the underbrush, and the occasional creak of branches swaying in the breeze. But that day, the silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the damp trail. It wasn't a peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that seemed to press down on you, amplifying every sound you made and making you painfully aware of your own presence. I tried to focus on the rhythm of my steps and the beauty of the trail as it gradually opened into a wider clearing. The fog pooled here like water in a basin, swirling around the bases of the trees and obscuring the path ahead. That's when I saw it, a dark figure standing motionless in the center of the trail, about 40 yards ahead. At first, I thought it was another hiker who'd stopped to rest or perhaps gotten turned around in the mist. Their silhouette was tall and slim, their posture unnaturally still, as if frozen mid-thought. "Morning!" I called out, my voice echoing weakly in the muffled air. I expected a wave, a nod, or some kind of acknowledgement. Instead, the figure remained perfectly still, their head tilted slightly to the side, as though studying me. A faint prickle ran up the back of my neck. I slowed my pace, squinting through the haze to get a better look, but the fog distorted their outline, making it impossible to make out any features. I stopped about 20 yards away, unsure whether to approach or turn back. "Everything okay up there?" I called again, louder this time, my voice carrying a note of forced cheerfulness. Still, there was no response. The figure didn't flinch, didn't shift, didn't react in any way. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe they were wearing headphones and couldn't hear me, or maybe they were lost in thought, unaware of my presence. But something about their stillness felt wrong. People, even when standing still, have a certain energy about them, a subtle movement, a rhythm to their breathing. This figure had none of that. They were as lifeless as a shadow cast on the ground. I took another tentative step forward, my instincts battling my curiosity. As I moved closer, the fog seemed to thicken, wrapping around the figure like a cloak and obscuring it even further. Just as I was debating whether to call out again or turn back, the figure moved. But it wasn't a normal, human movement. They didn't step aside or shift their weight. Instead, they turned in an impossibly smooth motion, almost as if gliding on ice, and began to drift deeper into the woods, disappearing into the fog without a sound. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a jolt of adrenaline surge through me. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to leave, to get back to the parking lot as fast as my legs would carry me. But another part, the same part that had drawn me to the trail that morning, refused to back down. What if it was just a hiker who needed help? What if they were injured or lost? I couldn't shake the thought that walking away without investigating further would haunt me. I picked up my pace, moving cautiously in the direction the figure had gone. The trail grew narrower, the trees pressing closer together, the gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The air was damp and cold, and every step felt heavier than the last. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure standing behind me, but the path remained empty. A few minutes later, I spotted them again, standing motionless off to the right of the trail, partially obscured by the mist. This time, they were closer, no more than 30 yards away. My pulse quickened as I realized they were facing me directly, their pale, featureless face barely visible through the fog. It wasn't a face, exactly, there were no distinct features, just a blank, ghostly pallor that made my stomach churn. The way they stood, so still and silent, sent a chill through me. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound confident. "Do you need help?" The figure didn't respond. They didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. They just stood there, staring, or at least, I felt like they were staring. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to take a step back, then another. As if in response, the figure tilted its head slightly, a slow, deliberate motion that felt more like a predator sizing up its prey than a person trying to communicate. And then, just like before, they turned and glided away, vanishing into the fog without a sound. I didn't wait to see if they'd reappear. My survival instincts finally kicked in, and I turned back toward the main trail, walking as fast as I could without breaking into a run. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breaths came in short, panic bursts. The fog seemed thicker now, swallowing the trail and turning every tree into a looming silhouette. I tried to focus on finding familiar landmarks, anything that would guide me back to the parking lot. The forest was eerily quiet, but the silence wasn't comforting. It felt oppressive, like the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure standing just a few feet behind me. My flashlight beam cut through the mist, illuminating nothing but empty trail. But that didn't make me feel any safer. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stumbled into a clearing and spotted the trail marker near the edge of the parking lot. Relief flooded through me as I broke into a jog, my boots crunching against the gravel path. I didn't dare look back until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as my hands shook. When I finally managed to unlock the door and slide into the driver's seat, I glanced toward the tree line one last time. There, at the edge of the woods, stood the figure, partially hidden in the shadows. They didn't move, didn't follow. They just stood there, watching as I started the engine and drove away. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the memory of that morning. I've tried to convince myself it was just another hiker, or a trick of the fog, or my imagination playing tricks on me after a stressful week. But deep down, I know better. Whatever I saw on that trail wasn't human, or at least, it wasn't something I was meant to understand. I haven't been back to that section of the trail since, and I'm not sure I ever will. The Appalachian Trail has a way of holding onto its secrets, and I've learned the hard way that some mysteries are better left unsolved. I called out again, louder this time, my voice straining to project through the oppressive fog. The silence that followed was heavy, unnatural, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, just for a moment, the fog thinned slightly, allowing me a clearer view of the figure. They weren't facing me directly, but stood at an odd angle, their head tilted ever so slightly to one side, as though they were listening to something, or perhaps someone, I couldn't hear. A shiver ran down my spine. Something about the way they stood there felt wrong, like an image frozen mid-motion, unnatural in its stillness. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the fog, the way light and shadow played games in the swirling mist, but my gut screamed otherwise. I took another cautious step forward, still trying to reason with myself, and then they vanished. One moment, they were solid and present, a dark silhouette against the gray-white haze. The next, they were simply gone, swallowed whole by the shifting fog. I froze in place, my pulse hammering in my ears, as I scanned the trees in every direction. I had seen fog do strange things before, make shadows ripple like water, create fleeting illusions of movement where there was none. But this was different. This wasn't an illusion. This was real. Adrenaline coursed through me as I hurried up the trail to the spot where the figure had been standing. My boots crunched on the damp ground as I scanned the area for any signs, footprints, broken branches, something to prove someone had been there. But there was nothing. The ground was undisturbed, the trees stood silent, and the air carried a stillness that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Even the usual forest sounds, birds, rustling leaves, the distant chirp of insects, were conspicuously absent, as if the entire world had been muted. The silence was suffocating. I forced myself to keep moving, more out of a need to do something than any clear sense of direction. After a few minutes, I stopped by a tree to take a drink from my water bottle, hoping the break would help me calm down. But before I could even uncap the bottle, a scream pierced the air. It was high-pitched and shrill, cutting through the fog with a ferocity that made my blood run cold. The sound was unmistakably human, or at least, it mimicked humanity so closely that I couldn't dismiss it. It seemed to come from somewhere behind me, no more than 100 yards away. My training kicked in immediately, the instincts from years of firefighting and rescue work taking over. Someone could be in serious trouble. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay composed. "Where are you? Do you need help?" Silence answered me. I strained my ears, listening for any hint of movement, a rustling of leaves, anything, but there was nothing. Still, I couldn't ignore the scream. Against my better judgment, I turned off the trail and stepped into the woods, heading in the direction I thought the sound had come from. The fog pressed in around me, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Every tree looked the same, their twisted branches reaching out like claws. I called out again, hoping for a response, but the only sound was the crunch of my own footsteps on the forest floor. The farther I ventured, the more disoriented I became. It felt like the forest was playing tricks on me, warping itself into an endless maze of identical trees and dense undergrowth. Soon, I realized I'd lost sight of the main trail entirely. My heart sank as I turned in a slow circle, trying to find something, anything, that looked familiar. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling sound up ahead, just beyond the thick curtain of fog. It was faint at first, like someone, or something, moving cautiously through the underbrush. Then it grew louder, closer, accompanied by the sharp crack of branches snapping underfoot. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice echoing in the eerie stillness. The rustling stopped abruptly, as if whatever was making the noise had frozen in place. For a moment, the silence was almost worse than the sound itself. Then it started again, this time from a different direction, as though multiple things were moving around me, circling just out of sight. Panic clawed at my chest as I realized I was surrounded, though by what, I couldn't say. "All right," I muttered under my breath, my voice trembling. "Time to head back." I turned around, desperate to retrace my steps and find the trail. But the fog was thicker now, swallowing up the landscape and obscuring any landmarks I might have used to orient myself. I walked faster, trying to stay calm, but every step only seemed to take me deeper into the woods. The rustling sounds followed me, keeping pace, sometimes fading into the distance only to return louder and closer a moment later. And then I heard the scream again. It was the exact same sound as before, the same pitch and tone, as though it had been perfectly replicated. The realization struck me like a thunderclap, it wasn't real. The scream wasn't natural. It was deliberate, calculated, designed to lure me deeper into the forest. My stomach churned as the implications set in, and I picked up my pace, no longer caring about stealth. I just needed to get out. Through the fog, I saw it again, the figure, standing still just a few yards away. This time, it was clearer than before, and I could see what I hadn't been able to earlier. There were no features, no color, just a faint, pale outline that seemed to blur at the edges, like a shadow cast by something not entirely solid. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. It just stood there, watching me. I took a step back, and as I did, the figure seemed to dissolve, its form melting into the fog until there was nothing left. The forest fell silent once more, but I didn't wait to see if it would reappear. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the uneven ground as I fought to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever I had just seen. After what felt like an eternity of stumbling through the dense woods, I finally spotted a break in the trees, a slight clearing that looked familiar. Relief flooded through me as I recognized a faint trail leading out of the woods. I followed it, my steps quick and unsteady, until I emerged back onto the main path. My chest heaved as I leaned against a tree, struggling to catch my breath. The fog was beginning to lift, and the first rays of sunlight filtered through the canopy, painting the trail in soft golden light. But I didn't feel safe. Even as I stood there, bathed in the warmth of the rising sun, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I glanced back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure standing just beyond the tree line. There was nothing there, but the sense of unease lingered, prickling at the edges of my awareness. I walked quickly back to the parking lot, every instinct urging me to leave the woods behind as fast as possible. As I reached my car, I couldn't resist one final glance toward the trail. The forest was quiet, the fog now a distant memory. But I knew, deep down, that the silence was deceiving. Whatever I had encountered out there wasn't gone, it was just waiting. I haven't been back to that section of the trail since, and I doubt I ever will. Some things, I've learned, are better left unexplored. The Appalachian Trail is beautiful, but it has its secrets, and those secrets are not meant for us to uncover. I kept walking, faster now, my boots crunching against the dirt trail, the sound of my own footsteps oddly comforting. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure standing silently behind me, its pale, distorted form blending into the trees. The fog had started to thin, patches of sunlight breaking through the canopy above, but it did little to soothe my nerves. The forest still felt oppressive, the air heavy and charged, as if it were holding its breath. I told myself to focus on the trail ahead, on putting as much distance as possible between me and whatever I had just encountered. Yet, the memory of that scream lingered, sharp and unrelenting, echoing in the back of my mind like a warning. When I finally emerged from that section of the trail and stepped into a clearing where the fog was lighter, I stopped and turned around. The forest behind me looked deceptively calm, the tall trees swaying gently in the breeze. I scanned the area, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, no figure, no sound, not even a whisper of wind to disturb the stillness. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe it was over. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, a trick of my overworked mind. But as I stood there, staring into the dense woods, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something had been out there. Something I wasn't supposed to see. The rational part of me tried to brush it off as paranoia, but deep down, I knew better. There was a presence in those trees, something far beyond my understanding. It hadn't followed me out into the clearing, but that didn't mean it was gone. It was waiting, watching, biding its time. The thought sent a shiver racing down my spine, and I turned away, forcing myself to keep moving. The further I walked, the more normal the trail began to feel. The birds had started singing again, their cheerful chirping a stark contrast to the eerie silence I'd experienced earlier. The trees seemed less menacing, their branches no longer clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. Even the air felt lighter, as if the forest had finally released the tension it had been holding. Yet, despite the apparent return to normalcy, my nerves refused to settle. My senses were on high alert, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sending my heart racing. I tried to focus on the sound of my footsteps, the rhythmic crunch of gravel underfoot, but the memory of that scream, sharp, piercing, and so human, kept playing over and over in my mind. I'd originally planned to make this a full-day hike, to push further up the trail and reach the scenic overlook I'd heard so much about. But that idea no longer seemed appealing. The thought of venturing deeper into the wilderness, of risking another encounter with, whatever that was, filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. I decided to cut the hike short, turning back far earlier than planned. I just wanted to get out of the forest, back to the safety of my car, back to civilization. The beauty of the Appalachian Trail, which had drawn me here in the first place, now felt like a cruel facade, hiding secrets I wanted no part of. As I neared the parking lot, the trail began to widen, the trees thinning out to reveal patches of open sky. The sun was higher now, its warm rays cutting through the last remnants of fog. For the first time in what felt like hours, I allowed myself to relax just a little. I was almost there, almost out of the woods. But even as I stepped into the clearing where my car was parked, I couldn't resist the urge to look back one last time. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the edge of the forest, half expecting to see that pale figure lurking in the shadows. At first, there was nothing. Just trees and sunlight, the forest standing silent and unremarkable. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. A flicker of movement at the edge of the woods, so brief I almost thought I'd imagined it. I squinted, trying to make out the shape, and there it was again, just a hint of pale skin, a fleeting silhouette that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. My heart skipped a beat, and I took a step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. Whatever it was, it hadn't followed me out of the forest, but it was still there. Watching. I fumbled with my car keys, my hands trembling as I unlocked the door. Sliding into the driver's seat, I locked the doors and started the engine, the familiar hum of the motor a small comfort in the face of my fear. As I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the narrow road that led away from the trailhead, I couldn't bring myself to look back. The weight of what I'd experienced hung heavy on my chest, a mix of terror, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. I had no idea what I'd encountered out there, no way to explain the scream, the figure, the oppressive silence of the forest. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going back. In the days that followed, I found myself replaying the events over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of what had happened. I wanted to believe it had all been a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the memory of that figure, its unnatural stillness, the way it seemed to dissolve into the fog, wouldn't leave me. And the scream, it hadn't just been a sound. It had been a warning, a message, though I couldn't decipher its meaning. I haven't been back to that trail since, and I doubt I ever will. The Appalachian Trail is beautiful, yes, but it's also vast and ancient, its secrets buried deep within its endless stretches of wilderness. Some things, I've learned, are better left unexplored. There's a reason those unmarked trails are unmarked, a reason the forest holds its silence so tightly. Whatever is out there, it's not meant for us to find. It watches, it waits, and when it chooses to reveal itself, it's not with answers, but with questions we're not ready to face. Even now, as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me home, not physically, but in memory, in the way my thoughts drift back to that moment when I saw the figure dissolve into the fog. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows stretch long, I think I hear it. The scream. Distant, faint, just at the edge of hearing. A reminder that the forest isn't as empty as it seems. And though I've moved on, part of me knows I left something behind on that trail, or maybe I brought something back with me. So if you ever find yourself on the Appalachian Trail, stick to the marked paths. Don't wander off into the unknown, no matter how inviting it may seem. And if you see something in the fog, something that doesn't move quite right, or a figure that watches from the trees, don't follow it. Turn back. Walk away. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. It wasn't long before I realized I had made a grave mistake. What started as a detour had turned into something far worse. The deeper I wandered, the more disoriented I became. Every direction looked the same, trees stretching endlessly upward, their branches forming a suffocating canopy that allowed only fleeting glimpses of the darkening sky. Bushes and shadows blurred together into an indistinct wall of green and gray. I tried retracing my steps, but it was like the forest had shifted around me, erasing any semblance of a trail. Each time I thought I recognized a landmark, a twisted tree, a fallen log, I'd find myself right back where I started, as if the woods were mocking me, leading me in circles. My phone was useless, no service, no GPS signal, and even the compass app couldn't seem to decide which way was north. Panic began to claw at the edges of my mind. Then came the footsteps. Faint at first, a quiet crunch of leaves somewhere behind me. I froze, straining to listen. The sound stopped, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I told myself it was nothing, maybe a squirrel, or the wind stirring the underbrush. But as I started walking again, the sound returned, louder and closer this time. Crunch. Snap. The unmistakable sound of someone, or something, moving deliberately through the forest. My chest tightened. I spun around, my eyes darting through the shadows, searching for the source of the noise. Nothing. Just trees, standing silent and still, their trunks bathed in the dim, fading light. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Is someone there?" No reply. Only silence. The kind of silence that seemed too complete, too deliberate, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The footsteps continued, circling me now, moving in bursts, closer, then farther away, then closer again. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, that my imagination was getting the better of me. But deep down, I knew. This was no animal. This was something else entirely. My pace quickened, my boots crunching against the uneven ground as I pushed forward, desperate to find any sign of the main trail. I had no idea how far I'd wandered or how much daylight I had left, but the thought of being stuck out here after dark filled me with dread. The footsteps followed me, unrelenting, their rhythm perfectly out of sync with my own. Every so often, I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye, a flicker of motion, a shadow darting between the trees. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just emptiness. The sun was beginning to set now, casting long, skeletal shadows across the forest floor. My breathing grew ragged, and sweat dripped down my temple despite the cool air. The footsteps were louder than ever, almost on top of me. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. "Show yourself." Silence. And then, just as I was about to move again, I heard it, a whisper. Low and melodic, drifting through the air like a ghostly lullaby. I couldn't make out the words, but there was something hypnotic about the sound, something that made me want to follow it. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run, I took a step forward, then another, drawn toward the voice like a moth to a flame. It led me deeper into the woods, away from the faint glow of the setting sun, until the forest was cloaked in near darkness. The whisper stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides. My pulse thundered in my ears as I realized just how alone I was. The footsteps had stopped, but the oppressive feeling of being watched remained, stronger than ever. I turned in a slow circle, my flashlight trembling in my hand as I scanned the trees. Shadows seemed to shift and twist at the edges of the beam, and I could feel it. Something was out there, just beyond my line of sight, watching, waiting. Then I tripped. My foot caught on a hidden root, and I went sprawling to the ground, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and skittering a few feet away. For a moment, I just lay there, stunned, the cold earth pressing against my cheek. When I reached for the flashlight, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic. I froze, my breath hitching as I realized what it was. Slowly, I turned my head, and there, lying partially buried in the dirt, was an old, rusted lantern. Its glass panels were cracked and covered in grime, and the handle was bent and twisted, as though it had been abandoned here for decades. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. The lantern felt like a warning, a relic left behind by someone who hadn't been as lucky as I was, or perhaps a trap, bait set to lure me further into the darkness. I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. Clutching the flashlight tightly, I turned and ran, my breaths coming in sharp, shallow gasps. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees pressing closer together, their branches clawing at my arms and legs as I stumbled through the underbrush. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping and echoing in a way that made my head spin. They seemed to come from every direction at once, surrounding me, mocking me. I tripped again, my knees slamming into the ground, and that's when I saw it, the faint glimmer of light through the trees, barely visible but unmistakable. Hope surged through me as I scrambled to my feet and pushed toward it, ignoring the pain in my legs and the scratches on my arms. The light grew brighter, closer, until I finally broke through the trees and found myself back on the main trail. I stumbled to a halt, gasping for air, my entire body trembling. The trail stretched out before me, wide and clear, bathed in the soft glow of the rising moon. For a moment, I just stood there, unable to believe I'd made it out. But as I turned to look back at the forest, my relief was short-lived. Standing just beyond the tree line, partially obscured by shadows, was a figure. Its pale, featureless face seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, and though it didn't move, I could feel its gaze boring into me. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the dirt trail as I made a beeline for the parking lot. When I finally reached my car, I threw myself inside and locked the doors, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the lot without looking back. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that I barely escaped with my life. The forest isn't just a collection of trees and wildlife, it's alive, in ways I'll never fully understand. And whatever I encountered out there, it wasn't human. So, if you ever find yourself hiking the Appalachian Trail, heed this warning, stay on the marked paths, and if you hear whispers or see a figure in the trees, don't follow. Some trails are meant to remain untraveled, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. I had ventured into the woods for solitude, a simple escape from the relentless pace of daily life, but the tranquility I sought was slowly unraveling. The first hour of my hike was everything I had hoped for. Golden sunlight filtered through the trees, dappling the forest floor with patches of light and shadow. The earthy scent of damp soil mingled with the faint sweetness of pine, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze created a soothing symphony of nature. My footsteps were steady, rhythmic, grounding me with each stride as I immersed myself in the beauty around me. I felt at peace, the weight of the world temporarily lifted. But then I saw it. Off to the right, about 50 yards from the trail, stood a figure. At first, I didn't think much of it, brushing it off as another hiker who had wandered off-path to explore. But something about the way they stood, so unnervingly still, made me pause. They didn't move, didn't shift their weight, didn't even glance in my direction. It was as though they had been frozen in time, a human statue among the trees. The longer I looked, the more the unease crept in, curling around my thoughts like a shadow. I slowed my pace, squinting through the dense foliage to get a clearer view. The figure appeared to be facing me, but it was hard to tell with the way the sunlight played tricks on my eyes, casting long shadows that stretched and distorted their form. The light filtering through the branches seemed to cling to them, highlighting their silhouette in an unnatural, ghostly glow. Their skin, or what I assumed was their skin, looked impossibly pale, almost translucent, as though it had never seen the light of day. A prickle of unease crawled up my spine. "Hey!" I called out, forcing a note of cheerfulness into my voice that I didn't feel. "You okay over there?" Nothing. No response. No movement. They just stood there, motionless, as though they hadn't heard me, or perhaps were choosing to ignore me. The silence around us felt heavy, oppressive, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe they were lost in thought, or maybe they hadn't noticed me yet. But deep down, I couldn't shake the growing sense that something was wrong. I took a tentative step forward, hoping that a bit of movement on my part might prompt a reaction. Still, they didn't move. I could feel my pulse quicken, a faint thrumming in my ears as I debated whether to approach or turn back. Something deep in my gut told me not to get closer, but curiosity won out. Another step. Then another. The forest seemed to grow quieter with each movement, the usual sounds of rustling leaves and chirping birds fading into an eerie stillness. And then, without warning, the figure turned. But it wasn't a normal turn, it was too smooth, too deliberate, almost as if they were gliding rather than moving. They didn't walk away so much as drift, their form slipping deeper into the shadows of the woods with an unnatural grace that made my skin crawl. A chill spread through me, prickling at the back of my neck, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, I told myself. Maybe the light and the fog were distorting my view, making their movements seem stranger than they actually were. I pressed on, determined to let it go and focus on my hike. For the next half hour, I tried to lose myself in the rhythm of my footsteps and the steady sound of my breathing, but the unease never fully left me. Every so often, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure lurking in the trees. The feeling of being watched clung to me like a second skin, impossible to shake. Then I saw them again. This time, they were much closer, only 30 yards away, standing just off the trail to my right. The same pale skin, the same unnervingly still posture, as though they were waiting for something. I froze mid-step, my breath catching in my throat. How had they gotten ahead of me? I hadn't heard any footsteps, hadn't seen any sign of movement. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at them, the sense of wrongness growing with every passing second. "Hello?" I called out again, louder this time. My voice wavered slightly, betraying the fear I was trying to suppress. "Is everything all right?" Silence. They didn't flinch, didn't so much as tilt their head in acknowledgement. They just stood there, their gaze, or what I assumed was their gaze, fixed on me. My pulse thundered in my ears as I took a cautious step back, my eyes never leaving the figure. I didn't know what I was expecting, a sudden movement, a response, anything, but they remained as still as a statue. And then, just like before, they turned. Smooth, soundless, drifting deeper into the woods until they vanished from sight. It was at that moment that I knew something was terribly, horribly wrong. This wasn't a lost hiker. This wasn't someone playing a prank. Whatever I was seeing, it wasn't human, or at least, it wasn't something I could understand. A cold sweat broke out across my skin as I turned back to the trail, my pace quickening with every step. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was all in my head, but deep down, I didn't believe it. The way they moved, the way they appeared and disappeared, it was too unnatural, too deliberate, like they were toying with me. The trail wound down into a hollow, and as I descended, the air grew cooler, heavier. The sunlight that had been my constant companion earlier was now dim and fleeting, barely breaking through the thick canopy overhead. I had to slow my pace as the path grew steeper, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. When I reached the bottom, I paused to catch my breath, scanning my surroundings. The trail was silent, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. For a brief moment, I thought I had lost them, that whatever had been following me was gone. But then I saw it again. A flash of pale skin, peeking out from behind a tree in the corner of my eye. I froze, my breath itching as I stared at the spot. There was nothing there now, just shadows and trees, but the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. I forced myself to keep moving, quickening my pace as my heart raced. All I wanted was to get back to the parking lot, to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever that was. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached a familiar clearing. Relief washed over me as I recognized the trail marker just ahead. I was close now, maybe 10 minutes from the parking lot. I broke into a jog, my footsteps pounding against the dirt as I pushed myself forward. But even as I neared safety, I couldn't resist one final glance over my shoulder. And there, standing just at the edge of the woods, was the figure. They were farther away now, almost swallowed by the shadows, but still watching. When I reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly it took me several tries to unlock the door. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I stole one last glance toward the trail. The figure had stepped closer, just enough to send a fresh wave of panic coursing through me. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I drove away as fast as I could, the image of their pale, motionless form burned into my mind. Even now, I can't fully explain what happened that day. I don't know who, or what, I saw in those woods, but I know this: the Appalachian Trail is beautiful, yes, but it's also a place of mysteries, some of which are best left undisturbed. If you ever find yourself hiking there, remember to stay on the main path and trust your instincts. Because out there, in the shadows of the forest, something is watching. As I sat in the car, my fingers trembling on the steering wheel, I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The engine's roar was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence as I sped away from the parking lot. The image of that pale, unmoving figure burned into the back of my mind. I didn't dare glance in the rearview mirror. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing it again, standing there at the edge of the woods, or, worse, closer than I'd left it. My hands were still shaking so violently that I could barely keep the car steady, and the knot of fear coiled tight in my chest didn't loosen, even as the familiar lines of the main road came into view. I was out of the forest, but it didn't feel like I'd truly escaped. Even now, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I can't shake the memory of that moment. It replays in my mind, sharp and vivid, like a scene from a nightmare that refuses to fade with the morning light. Every time I close my eyes, I see it, the stark pallor of that figure's skin, the eerie way it seemed to glide through the trees, the way it watched me without really watching, as though it saw me in a way no human could. The logical part of my brain has tried to convince me it was just a hiker, someone lost in thought or playing a cruel prank. But deep down, I know better. No human moves like that, and no human disappears the way that figure did, dissolving into the shadows as if the forest itself had swallowed it whole. I haven't been back to that trail since. I tell myself it's because I've been busy or that there are other trails to explore, but the truth is that I'm scared. Scared of what I might see if I ever return. Scared of what might happen if I don't leave quickly enough next time. The sense of dread I felt in those woods was unlike anything I've ever experienced, and I know in my heart that whatever I encountered wasn't supposed to be there, and it certainly didn't want me there either. The thought of what might have happened if I had hesitated a moment longer, if I hadn't managed to start the car, sends a fresh wave of chills racing down my spine. I don't want to imagine what it would have done, but the cold certainty that I wouldn't have been able to leave lingers like a dark cloud over my thoughts. Since that day, I've found myself questioning the nature of the Appalachian Trail and the stories that cling to its winding paths like fog in the early morning light. I used to dismiss tales of strange encounters and ghostly sightings as overactive imaginations or the effects of exhaustion and isolation. But now, I can't help but wonder if there's more truth to them than I was willing to admit. Maybe the trail really does have a life of its own, one that isn't always kind to those who wander too far off the beaten path. Maybe the wilderness holds secrets that we, as humans, aren't meant to uncover, secrets that watch us from the shadows, waiting for the moment we let our guard down. I've shared my story with a few close friends, and their reactions have been mixed. Some laugh it off, telling me I've watched one too many horror movies or let my imagination run wild. Others nod solemnly, their own faces clouded with memories they'd rather forget, and tell me about their own encounters with the unexplainable. It's comforting, in a way, to know I'm not alone in what I've experienced, but it doesn't make the fear any less real. If anything, it makes it worse. Because if others have seen similar things, if they've felt the same bone-deep terror I did, then it means these stories aren't just figments of our imaginations. It means there really is something out there, something that doesn't belong in our world, but watches and waits in the wilderness all the same. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the only sound is the faint rustle of the wind against the windows, I think I hear it. That scream. It echoes faintly at the edge of my hearing, just loud enough to send a shiver crawling down my spine. It's probably nothing more than a memory, my mind replaying the most terrifying moment of that day. But part of me wonders if it's more than that. If maybe, somehow, the forest has found a way to follow me, its shadows creeping into the edges of my life even as I try to leave them behind. I don't know if that thought is more terrifying or comforting. At least, if it's true, it means I wasn't imagining it all. So now, I tell anyone who asks about hiking the Appalachian Trail the same thing: stick to the marked paths. Don't wander down unmarked trails or side paths, no matter how inviting they might seem. And if you ever see something in the woods, something pale and still, something that doesn't move quite the way it should, don't follow it. Turn back. Walk away. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, and some paths aren't meant to be traveled. The Appalachian Trail is beautiful, there's no denying that. Its forests are lush and ancient, its mountains rugged and awe-inspiring. But beauty can be deceiving, and for all its splendor, the trail hides secrets that challenge everything we think we know about the world. I don't know what I encountered that day, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is that I was lucky to leave those woods alive, and I'm not willing to take that chance again. As for you, reader, Whether you're an experienced hiker or someone who simply enjoys a walk in nature, heed this warning. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. If you hear whispers or footsteps that don't match your own, don't stick around to find out what's making them. The wilderness is vast and mysterious, and while it offers peace and solace to those who respect it, it can also turn on those who don't. The shadows between the trees aren't always empty, and sometimes the things that watch us from the darkness are far older and far stranger than we can comprehend. This isn't meant to scare you away from the Appalachian Trail or from nature itself. It's a reminder to tread carefully, to respect the power and mystery of the wild. Because while the forest is beautiful and ancient, it is also alive in ways we may never fully understand. And out there, beyond the reach of civilization, something is watching. Something that doesn't belong to our world, but lingers in its shadows all the same. So take care, and remember, some paths are better left untraveled, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. If my story made you second-guess your next hike, you're not alone. But if it also made you curious, if it awakened a part of you that wonders what might lie beyond the safety of the known, then take this advice to heart. Be cautious. Be alert. And above all, be ready to turn back. Because sometimes, the wilderness watches back.